Okay, so yes, thank you everyone for taking the time to come here today, and I hope you all had a nice half term. So this is going to be the third of this year's Teachers Committee online sessions, and we're really delighted to have Dr. Naomi Green here with us today, who is a researcher, lecturer, and community advocate, and the focus of her work is on integration and anti-racism in Northern Ireland, as she'll go into in more depth, of course. She's also the lead researcher on the Northwest Migrant Forum's Hidden Histories project, which highlights the overlooked contribution of Black and minority ethnic communities in Northern Irish history and education. We were lucky during the anti-bias course, the 3-day one, which I know some of you were on back in autumn, to have Naomi there to present to the group and also to engage in conversations with them about her work. And again, we're delighted to have her today. So Naomi, whenever you're ready, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. I have quite a lot to go through, so it's probably good that this is being recorded. So anyone who anything you can come back and have a look. And also, if anyone has any questions, do reach out to me either through Tiernan, and I'll share my email at the end, because as I said, there's a lot to go through. So I've called this Hidden History. It is the title of the Black Heritage Project, but I think also I think a lot of you are going to be surprised by how much is actually covered in this talk as well, because we often talk about history in Northern Ireland in terms of the two communities, and then we just simply don't. Sorry, I can't work out how to change my screen. We often don't think about Northern Irish history in terms of anyone other, literally other than the dominant communities. But I just want to start with a little bit of caveat as well. I know you do a lot of anti-racism training within the integrated school sector, but just wanted to put everything that I'm going to say today in a little bit of context. Identity it's often the labels that we put on other people. Sometimes we put them on ourselves. They're very complex, they're multifaceted, they're dynamic, they're constantly changing, they're fluid. But they're social concepts. So the concept of being Black, the concept of being, belonging to a lot of categories, it's not down to our biology. Sometimes it's just how we look, and it's the categories that we're assigned to. So just bear in mind that although I'm using categories, they're not perfect, and not everyone will fit neatly into a box. But generally, we're talking about people who are minoritized in Northern Ireland. So they may not be in the global, we'll talk about the global majority. They may be part of a global majority, but when they come to Northern Ireland, they are not part of the two dominant communities. In Northern Ireland, we tend to use the term ethnic minority or minority ethnic. We're still, very much predominantly white population, but 3.4% of our population belongs to what is termed an ethnic minority group. That also includes Roma and Irish travellers and other ethnicities as well, but predominantly the most dominant ones would be the Black community, Indian and Chinese. But even within those groups, there's lots of diversity, and I think it's just really important that these are labels, but there's a lot of diversity within those labels, and what that means to an individual may change. But we're working in quite broad categories here. As I said, Northern Ireland, we tend to use these terms ethnic minority or ethnic minorities. I think it's better to say minoritized, because they're not minorities really, as in lesser, but it's just their statistical, number in comparison to everybody else. We also tend to use the term other. Both of these terms I really hate. Other, because it's your others, PUL, CNR, or other, and that term is essentially meaningless, because what does other mean? There's such a diverse category, and in itself is an othering term. And the one I particularly hate is newcomer. And it is not any teacher's fault, but the Education Authority do use this to refer to a pupil whose home language is not English or Irish and needs additional school support. Now, in the rest of these islands, so in Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales, they tend to use terms related to English language. So they say like English language learners or something like that, which is much more inclusive, because what can happen in Northern Ireland is you could be born in Northern Ireland to parents who aren't English speakers and be labelled a newcomer. And that has a lot of stigma, this idea that you're a newcomer, that you're not really from here. It can have a lot of stigma, sorry. So it's a significant portion of our school children in Northern Ireland, but this term itself, I think, is heavily loaded. And when do you stop becoming a newcomer? There are communities that are labeled newcomer communities. And I'm just going to tell you now that they are not newcomer communities. Many of them have been, as a communities, part of this country or influenced this country longer than I've been alive. And you'll get this as we go through everything. So also another little bit of context about why it's important to talk about Black and minority history. In the past, like in the 1600s, European scientists decided that there was a racial hierarchy, that humans were divided into 5 broad categories with white at the top and everybody else in this hierarchy. As recently as 3 years ago, I heard of a geography teacher in one of our top grammar schools talk about the 5 races of man to their GCSE class. It is junk science. There's no biological basis. There could be someone who looks Black, they're black skinned and they're 50% Irish and they're closer related to me than someone who's white and comes from France. The categories that we are placed in is based on our appearances. We come from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, but the concept that we fit into these 5 categories as human beings is just absolute junk science. So if we were taught in the past that this existed and this kind of has been absorbed in society for centuries, we have to basically consciously unlearn that. And if we're not teaching not just history, but everything that we do in that context, in that global context, it can impact belonging and acceptance of children from backgrounds, minoritized backgrounds. Some of you might have seen this before. This to me is possibly one of the most stark pieces of research that's come out of these islands in the least recent years. So in 2023, the ESRI did a comparative study of students, or it was much broader than this, but part of the subject participants that they looked at were children in the north and the south, and they looked at what they call natives, so people whose parents and ancestry come from either the north or south, those who are first generation migrants, and those are second generation, so at least one parent has come from another country and they're mixed heritage. And what they found is that second generation migrant origin children have levels of school belonging that are almost twice as low as their native peers. They also find impacts on mental health and lots of very worrying things. So there's something that we're doing wrong in Northern Ireland specifically, because they didn't find this trend in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. They only find it in Northern Ireland, that says you don't belong the same way. And this is for children who are born here but who have mixed heritage. So, oops, my slides decided to do something weird. So this is why I feel it's really important that the way we teach and the way we talk about our society and the way we talk about knowledge and history in particular, but there's other forms of knowledge, are actually representative and inclusive, and they're not talking about sort of us versus them, that they do reflect the ways that we have been shaped with the wider world. We're not this little place that hasn't, we talk a lot about the conflict and, ourselves and it may be quite insular ways, but we have still been shaped by the interactions with the wider world in different ways. And we are not historically a pure racial society. I mean, I think particularly at the moment, a lot of the political discourse is almost like we are who we are because of, we are kind of this particular white Christian society, and everything else is coming here and taking all our stuff that we've built. But the reality is that there have been Black, Asian and other ethnic minorities in the UK and Ireland for centuries, not just the last 20 years, but centuries, and that includes Northern Ireland. And I'm not talking about a kind of token diversity inclusion type thing, but generally but a genuine kind of shift in how we think. Whose viewpoints and narratives are we listening to, are informing the lessons that they teach and the way that we teach, and looking at students from diverse backgrounds as more than just others or newcomers. And that also includes the language that we use about this. Sorry, so as I said, looking at this beyond diversity, it's questioning our knowledge. questioning where does it come from? The culture, the power, and the assumptions that we make when we're talking about. And I'm going to do sort of a broad picture. First, the very little things like algebra. Algebra is an Arabic word, which means like essentially algebra means making the broken parts whole. And algebra is, something that we teach in schools every day. But the roots of that word are Arabic. So much of our knowledge that we teach and know and kind of on a daily basis comes from China, comes from India, comes from Persia, comes from the Arab countries, comes from, Central Europe, different parts of the world. So we're not this kind of isolated place where everything is just been built up only by our ancestors, but also by this kind of global connections and interconnections. So I'm going to talk about two particular projects. My focus is on, as Tiernan said, I'm the lead researcher in the Black Heritage, Hidden Heritage, Black Heritage in Northern Ireland project, which is run with the Northwest Migrants Forum, and also another project that I am have kind of, it's not funded, but it's just kind of something I've been doing on Muslim graves and Muslim history in Northern Ireland. So my focus is predominantly in those two areas. There's so much more that I'm not even going to get around to today, but hopefully this will give you an indication of both of those things and make you go and learn more, or come and talk to me, or go to the exhibition. So basically, when I'm talking about how we're influenced by the world, sometimes we talk about, when we talk about history, we're talking about a very limited view of what history is. And particularly when we're talking about maybe Africa, we tend to talk about it in terms of maybe famine and war and kind of all this, even slavery. But the reality is, there are these great civilizations that came from Africa, and most people have never heard of many of these things. Most people have not heard of Mansa Musa, the richest man ever to have existed. I think at one point, maybe not now, but certainly he was the equivalent of Elon Musk in terms of wealth. There's Benin, which is current day Nigeria, that developed bronze and iron and metal work that we all benefit from today. So there's kind of a global connections that we often overlook when we are talking about so many things. The world has been connected long before there were planes, and I think sometimes we forget beyond Europe that there's been connections and sharing of information and knowledge. And we've forgotten a lot of the stories about how they impact us here on these islands. So Protestant Reformation is something we cover in history all the time, but we don't talk about the fact that because Elizabeth I was isolated within Catholic Europe, she made alliances with the Muslim powers at that time. So Sultan Murad of the Ottoman Empire, they had a pact that ran up until the end of the Ottoman Empire in 1900s. 1911. The Moroccan and the Iranian Shah as well. These kind of, the trade routes went between the Muslim majority countries and England, and also the House of Orange in the Netherlands. During the Irish famine on Guatemala, there was also international support. The Ottomans delivered aid through the port of Drogheda. And the Choctaw Nation, which is an indigenous American tribe, raised money and sent money for food during the Irish famine. So there's kind of connections that we don't talk about, and we don't, these are both subjects, the Reformation, the famine, that we cover all the time, but we don't always think about them beyond our shores and beyond the influence and the impact it had on us. So yeah, and also we often leave women out of the story. I'm not going to go into these guys, but I'm putting them up there just to show that there's often women that we leave out of the stories as well. And we often leave out things like innovation, the traffic light, the lifts, NASA. All these had massive influence from African Americans, but when we talk about minorities, it tends to be in the sense of dance or culture or food, but there's so much more that we could be going into. And this is kind of the bulk of what I'm going to talk about today, as if I haven't talked enough already, is that Black and minority history. It's not something that we put in a box over there and we take it out in Black History Month or Muslim Heritage Month, which is in March. it's our history and it's part of our history. And all of these images are from Ireland. So that painting is from the 17th century, of a servant in I can't remember which county. The middle photo is African American GIs who were stationed here during World War II. And the photo there, of the man with the baby, that's Max Orlando, who was killed in the Dunmurry train bombing during the Troubles. And again, that's a story that most people will not have heard of any of these stories or be aware that that this is part of our history here. And again, I don't know what's happening with my ordering of slides, but oops, sorry. I've gone too far now. Ugh, technology disaster. Again, these images on the right, most people won't know that these are both images from Belfast, taken in Belfast. Black and ethnic minority people are recorded in Britain and Ireland since at least the Roman and Victorian times. And from the 1700s, we began to see people working and living in Ireland from different ethnic backgrounds. I already mentioned the 37,000 Black American GIs, they're particular units that were stationed here in Northern Ireland. Students and doctors from Africa, Asia and Middle East that came from the 1940s. And I'm going to go into detail on some more of those as well. So as I said, because we're an island, we're at the edge of Europe, we tend to see ourselves as Ireland as a place of, outward migration. So many went to Australia, to America, to Canada, to wherever in search of work. But Ireland, particularly in the early medieval period, was, was a land, literally a land of saints and scholars, and it was on the map. So early Arab and Persian cartographers actually included Ireland in their maps. They were aware of us even if they hadn't visited. There's an eyewitness account of whaling near Ireland by another Moorish, which is North Africa, Arab geographer. And Al-Idrisi, who is a very famous North African cartographer, sometimes called the father of geography. He visited York and wrote detailed descriptions of Ireland and Scotland, but it's not clear if he actually visited. He may have just done it by word of mouth, but we were certainly quite literally on the map, and there's just a little bit clearer where exactly we are, because we're kind of lying on our back there, and not maybe as geography correct, but we're still there on the map. There were also, because the Vikings were present down in Dublin, there's also like diplomatic relations. The Umayyad, which is one of the biggest Muslim empires in history, they sent a diplomatic mission down to Dublin in 845, to see the Vikings. So this history is not just 20 years ago, post-conflict, ceasefire, Good Friday Agreement. This history is often a lot older than people realise. In the Annals of Ireland, there's also a little fragment, really interesting fragment about a Viking raid on Morocco, and the taking of a great host of North African captives by the Vikings, who were then brought to Ireland, and they remained a distinct group and eventually became part of the Irish populace. They were known as the Black Men or the Black Men for a considerable period before they eventually just became part of our DNA and part of our history. Also, during the colonial period, thousands of Irishmen, often with their wives and children, served in India in the East India Company. 42% of the British Army was actually Irish by the mid-1800s. And some of them took their servants home on their return, either on a permanent basis or temporary basis. And some of them made their mark here. So obviously this is pre-partition. Sheikh Dean Muhammad, he came with his corporal back to Cork, and he wrote about his travels. He married an Irish woman and moved to England. And then there was Mir Aulad Ali. He also came with his through the British Army, but he came first to England, married an English woman, and then lived in Ireland. And he was very actively involved with the promotion of the Irish language in Ireland. He was a great linguist. He taught Hindustani, Arabic, and Persian, also spoke English and Irish, and he taught in Trinity College in Dublin in the 1800s. A little bit closer to home, the Cockle House in Crumlin, which some of you might know, small little kind of folly that's built near the river. Part of the Rowley Highland family, which are great flour mills owners. They built this little folly on their land. It's now part of the Crumlin Glen, and according to local tradition, it was built for one of their Muslim servants to pray. We don't know his name; has been lost to history, but that's kind of a little bit of local lore as well. There were individuals who played kind of, I guess, a side role in quite major historic events in Ireland. Tony Small was a formerly enslaved man. He saved the life of the United Irishman, Edward Fitzgerald, in the 1700s, came to Ireland, lived with him, and actually was the man who told him to get out when he was going to be attacked. He actually saved his life on one occasion. He ended up being killed anyway. But he lived in Leinster House, which is now the seat of the Irish Parliament. Rachel Baptiste, she was a Black Irish singer, born in Ireland, but known to be Black, who performed across Ireland, particularly in Carrickfergus, Downpatrick and Lisburn. Her final concert was in Belfast Assembly Rooms, which is, currently, I think just recently being told that they're going to refurbish those, but currently rotting in the centre of Belfast. So there's these kind of historical connections to lots of things that we would know every day. I think when we talk about Black history, we often think about enslavement, and I'm really not touching much on that at all today. But Belfast's economy was built through not through the slave economy itself, but through provisioners. So the tea, the sugar that was coming from the plantations, and also cobblers who sent shoes and linens and things to the plantations, some of which were for the use of enslaved people. And here, Belfast was quite as many of you know, it was a sort of quite a radical space politically. The United Irishmen and others were, had these kind of progressive ideas. They were absolutely anti-slavery. So they brought over former people who were formerly enslaved, such as Oledo Quano, who was enslaved as a child. He wrote a really powerful narrative, and he spoke against slavery in the UK. And he came to Belfast in 1791, into Clifton House and to other places, but Clifton House is probably the most famous one, and was part of that campaign to end slavery in the UK. And when slavery was ended in 1833, the Belfast was still a site of abolition, calling for abolition. I don't need to introduce Mary Ann McCracken, very, very famously sat at the docks and gave out anti-slavery pamphlets about America, because it continued in America up until much later. And the year before she died, slavery in the USA ended. So, and then she died the following year, but she was one of the leading lights in Belfast against slavery. But it wasn't just her. There are others. So she heard Oledo Quano back when he was here. And then she heard 20 years later, American abolitionist Frederick Douglass, there's now a statue of him in Belfast, who visited Ireland in 1845. But there were others who visited. About 20 African-American abolitionists visited Ireland during this period. Frederick Douglass was the most prominent, but there were others, including women, such as Sarah Parker Remond, who came and she toured Ireland, particularly to speak to the women about the impact that slavery had on women. So, and sort of more other ways that we had influences. There was a massive influence, and this is just one of many groups that visited Belfast during this period from 1871. There were African-American singers and singers from Africa itself who came and sung in our churches. When I say that the Fisk singers left a massive mark on our churches, that's almost been forgotten on our sort of hymn singing traditions, particularly the Protestant traditions. They came, they sung not only in Belfast and Derry and Newry, they went to churches in quite, I would say, very obscure places. They're in Carrickfergus, they were in, these small towns, they're small now, but they were even smaller back in the 1800s. And there's some amazing stories. And again, if you come to the exhibition, I'll talk about it towards the end. You'll be able to read more about the many people that came to Belfast. But this photograph here, I showed you a clip of the Mr. Loudon, who's the guy standing there, taken in Belfast, and what's now the jewelers, Lund's the jewelers. It used to be a famous photography place in 1901, and this photo was taken in Belfast. And this young lady, Nina Clinton, she wrote the most beautiful letters home to her mother, and her granddaughter has those letters, and she shared that letter with me, and it's part of the exhibition. And I've just the tiniest wee clip there in the image from February the 9th, 1901. And she talks about Belfast, and she talks about the linen greens and all the linens being laid out. Absolutely amazing. And how people see her and recognize her in the street, that they must be with the Fisk singers. Powerful, powerful stories. I could just dwell on that story alone. But what I'm trying to get to is that the history is so rich, and there's so much that we can be talking about, and we don't talk about it. And this is another perfect example. This is my other pet project, the Muslim Sailors' Graves project. And obviously Belfast is known for its shipbuilding. But every year there were sailors coming from around the world coming to Belfast for a very long time. The Lascars are basically non-European sailors who served on British Merchant Navy ships. And by 1918, about a quarter of the sailors that were coming to UK ports were Lascars. And when I was doing my PhD, I was like, I read about them. We know about them in Glasgow. We know about them in London. We knew about them in Cardiff. And I thought, well, let's look what is there in Belfast. And I found a record from 1885 where there was a dispute with shipbuilders over wages by three Muslim seamen from India who were living in a workhouse infirmary. Actually, two were in a workhouse and one was on the street, a young boy. There's also another newspaper report from 1889 of the P&O steamer SSS China. And it talks about the men coming to shore because they were there for several months while the ship had gone aground somewhere off the coast of, I think it was somewhere between here and Australia, had been brought back to Belfast, but the crew were still on the ship, and they were living in Belfast for several months while the ship was being repaired. And you know, they drew quite a lot of attention. And also then I started looking in our local graves. So I looked in Belfast City Cemetery, and I found at least 9 Lascars buried in unmarked graves. So it's not the per graves, but the graves were owned by the ship company, and they just put them in there. They didn't actually mark the graves. So they're unmarked, but they are individual plots. And there's at least 9 buried in Belfast City Cemetery. So this part of our maritime history and part of our history here in Belfast are the sailors that helped build Belfast, but in a very subtle way. And a lot of them, or some of them, became the early settlers. Southeast Asian communities and the Chinese communities are two of the largest and oldest minoritized ethnic communities in Belfast, and we're talking sort of 5-6 generations now for some of these families. Some came as from the ships. They were Lascars, and they settled, they married. Others, you know, they invited family over from India, from Pakistan, or over from England. They built livelihoods going door to door, selling clothes, and then eventually later clothing businesses. So the likes of Anderson Macaulay's, which was a huge department store. I talk about it, and then some people are like, I don't know what you're talking about, so I give away my age. But Anderson Macaulay's was, you know, a huge department store in Belfast until 20 years ago or something. And one of the main families that supplied warehouses that supplied the clothes for that was actually a Muslim family who's have been here for now 6 generations. So there's many ways in which minority communities have influenced our society without us even maybe acknowledging or recognizing. And of course, the Jewish, Italian, and Huguenot communities moved to the region from the 1800s and were behind many of the businesses as well. They're not really, I'm not talking about them not because they weren't significant, but simply because I have so much other stuff to talk about, and I'm focusing on my areas of expertise. But there's so much out there that we just don't really acknowledge or talk about. And of course, the Chinese community, again, another community that has been so influential, but I'm not talking about today, but I just don't want to not talk about the largest minority ethnic community for many years. It's only recently shifted, but they have a significant presence across Northern Ireland since the 1600s through the catering trade and again, chain migration, because from the 60s they began to limit visas, so you could only come if you were going to work in certain professions, so that limited who came here and how they came here. So I mentioned earlier the American GIs. This is, I think, Macrofelt. No, it's not. It's Moneymore. This parade at the bottom here. So this group of them singing in the Grosvenor Hall in Belfast. They were part of the story of the war. We talk a lot about World War II and the American GIs, but because of segregation in America, they had entire units that were only black soldiers, and then they had white soldiers, and they were stationed in different units. And two of the units were stationed here, and the men came through Northern Ireland. They trained in Northern Ireland and then were sent out. They were generally, because of the racism in America, they were generally given kind of menial roles during the war. And again, so many were left out of the narrative. Our universities have been a massive draw. From the 1920s, we've had international students coming. These newspaper clippings, Ghana's independence was 1950. I thought I had down there, it's the 1950s. This other clippings from 1948. So this people have come to study from all over the world. In significant numbers in the 60s, but there were smaller numbers from much earlier than that. Particularly Uganda. There was a particular exchange program where they brought initially all women to Stranmillis, and that picture that I showed you of the women who were all standing on the steps earlier. They had come to Stranmillis as part of that training program. Then they eventually had men. They let the men in 1967, but unfortunately, when the Troubles began, that exchange ended. Oh, so there they are. I thought I had it there. So this is a group of Ugandan teachers who trained in Stranmillis, and so that went on for about a decade, and then unfortunately, because of the Troubles, that program ended. But this is not new, is basically what I'm trying to say. This is all sort of 60s, this kind of where we had students, African students coming from Stranmillis to go and teach in Green Island Primary School and show some traditional culture and dance. And this is in the 1960s. There's also been a massive contribution, of course, from in our NHS, doctors and nurses. Before the NHS, but particularly since the NHS, there's been people who have come over to work and study, even at the most difficult days. This is, again, just going back to my Grace project, this medical student died of TB in 1928, and he's buried in the cemetery in Belfast City Cemetery. Another doctor who came over was Dr. Raphael Armateau, who was based in Derry. He came in 1939. He opened a medical practice, but he was also a medical researcher, and he was nominated for a Nobel Prize. He didn't win, but he was nominated for a Nobel Prize. He was not only a medical researcher, he also was very interested in race science and anthropology, and the kind of a dismantling kind of racist ideas around race and ethnicity. And this is a letter he wrote he had a kind of extensive exchange with Professor Du Bois, who was very prominent in America around the ending of segregation in America. And every time I go to Propin. And again, so that was kind of the kind of people that came, and the diverse groups of people that came in the early 1900s. And again, when we talk about, there's so much here. I hope you appreciate I'm just rattling through this, because I want to leave a bit of time at the end for hopefully a little bit of time for questions. We talk about also the Troubles in terms only of the two communities, but business owners, Muslim doctors and nurses, those are not just Muslim, but minority. There was Indian, Chinese, all different communities that lived here. Some had come with the British Army as well. And we know that there were at least 30 Troubles victims from ethnic minority and traveller backgrounds. So that includes people who are injured or otherwise impacted directly by the Troubles. Um, in terms of who was killed, there are Nurbaz Khan, which is this picture here, this young man. He was 18. He had come to Northern Ireland when he was, I think, um, 5 or 6, and he was killed. He was shot in 1973. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, who was killed in 1974. Both of them were working for their families, worked as caterers for the army. Max Orlando, I've already talked about. He was killed in the Dunmurry train bombing, the first African to be killed and only Nigerian to be killed in the Troubles. Asha Chopra was killed in Derry in 1974. She was pregnant and she was killed in front of her 2 young children. So again, when we're talking about very difficult periods in our history, there are others who we often leave out of the conversation. And there are other legacies that they're very difficult. With the students, the doctors, the GIs, there were often relationships between those men and local women. And sometimes there were pregnancies, and sometimes there were marriages, but unfortunately, because of the times that it was, there's a lot of stigma around marrying outside of, mixed race marriages, and a lot of children were born and put in mother and baby homes. Now, we haven't got much locally, sort of in the north, about the mother and baby homes. There's an inquiry on now, but there was a report in the Republic of Ireland by the Collaborative Forum on Mother and Baby Homes, and they talk about the systematic discrimination of mixed against women and children of mixed race families. So there were quite a lot of mixed race children who were basically stripped of their identity, culture, and even weren't aware of their ethnicity or the language that their fathers spoke, or even the names of their fathers. This particular picture is Nazareth House, which is in Belfast, and we know that there were mixed heritage babies in this home. But again, the information around this is very shady, but it's part of the legacy of everything that went before as well that we still have to reckon with. So I hope that made sense. That was kind of a rattle through just a snapshot of what is going on. I have to say, like, I love the Mila. I love the dance. I love the colour. I love, there's some fantastic work that people do around diversity, but it's good for us to look beyond sometimes the colourful, the dance, the food, and look at some of the other stories. And I hope that gives you a little indication of some of the things. And maybe you were thinking, as we are going through that, I could include that in this lesson or that lesson. And it's about embedding into the stories, not just creating a special lesson and say, we're going to talk about Black history today. You can embed it as you go along. You can include some of these characters into stuff that you're doing. Northern Ireland, over the last year, in particular, last year or two, has been horrific, the levels of racism that we've seen. Amnesty International called last year a shameful year of hate. Since 2016, we have seen a rise, exponential rise in racism. It's since 2016, the amount of racism has overtaken sectarianism in Northern Ireland. And it can be really difficult for us to see it sometimes. Sometimes it's subtle, it's not overt. And increasingly we're seeing a shift, not just about, people's appearance or skin color or whatever, but this kind of narrative that there's this cultural incompatibility based on stereotypes, based on misinformation, based on disinformation. It's called like neo-racism. And education is the perfect space to challenge that normalization. And part of it is taking away kind of the exoticize the kind of others, or this exotic kind of things to look at. But actually, this way of looking at the world, looking at us, the interconnectedness of human beings, how our history have intersected, influenced, how we've been influenced by the world and how we have influenced the world, it kind of challenges that narrative at its absolute root. Suddenly, someone from Nigeria is not just one of those. It's not just an other, not just a newcomer. Well, Nigeria is where, bronze craftsmanship was born. Iron was founded, was discovered. Suddenly, someone is coming from a country of knowledge, and there's um how we frame other countries and other places and other people's influences, how they're perceived in the present. And looking at, I suppose, the world is kind of, we're all standing on each other's shoulders in some way, rather than kind of an us and we're helping them, those poor people from those poor countries. It shifts the whole narrative, and how we're talking about people, and how, the fact that there's, a Ghanaian doctor who came and was helping people in the 1930s in Derry, that's a shift, a power shift, from so much of the stories that we hear. Um, and I think education is such a powerful space to change that narrative and to fight back against the kind of hate that we're seeing, and the lack of empathy, and the divisions that we're seeing in our world. So I just want to leave you, hopefully, if we've got time, I don't know if we've got time for questions, but I just want to leave you with these two kind of resources. The Black History Heritage Project, it is currently in Coleraine. It will be coming to Belfast. I don't have the exact dates, but if you go to hiddenhistoryni.org.uk, you can read more about the project. You can read more about you won't see the full project, full exhibition, unless you go and see it. It's currently during a tour of Northern Irish Libraries, so I think it's coming to Belfast. I don't want to get the date wrong. I think it's just gone to Coleraine. That's all I know. I can't remember dates, and I don't want to tell you the wrong date. But if you do keep an eye on, it's also on social media. Do get down and see it, and learn a bit more about, and specifically looking at people of African heritage. So that's includes people from, African Americans, and people of African heritage historically, not necessarily just from Africa. Also just want to do also a little push for my proposed memorial for the Belfast City Cemetery. If you go to Muslim Graves Belfast, tinyurl.com, Muslim Graves Belfast, you can read more about some of the Muslims who are buried, and a little bit more about the Lascars in Belfast. So we can share those links as well, but do look further into that. There are other resources that I sort of didn't get to talk about all, the absolute diversity that we have within Northern Ireland: Belfast Jewish Community, Chinese Community Welfare Association, Belfast Islamic Centre, Indian Community Centre, Polish Community, and more. Fantastic resources. A lot of them have a little bits about their history. So there is, if you have any questions, do please get in touch as well. But if you have any questions now, you can also ask. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Naomi. So yeah, if anyone does have any questions now, feel free to switch your mic off or type it in the chat, or just comments as well. No pressure.
Silence.
Naomi, I don't know if it's a good question or a silly question, really. We have just, as a school, have sort of felt that racism was sort of on the rise, racist language amongst pupils, and things like that there. And I don't know if I'm maybe lonely, but as a primary school, I mean, there's good storybooks and things like that there, but I struggle to find sort of really good sort of resources or programs, or that sort of we could use to sort of do more work. I mean, obviously, as you said, we do Black History Month in October, but I'm just very aware that if we do Black History Month, I don't want to just have that month, but I find it very hard to find resources or guidance that are specific to primary school, maybe even upper key stage 2, or lower key stage 2 even. Is that just me, or is there?
I think one of the really great resources is the Welsh. The Welsh have done an anti-racist curriculum, and they have quite a lot. I have just forgotten the name of their DARPL. There. So if you type in Welsh anti-racist curriculum, so they do have a lot of resources. So actually, as part of this project, we travelled to Wales and we went to a primary school, and it was how they integrated it in the everyday. So when they're talking about during World War II, they were talking about the African GIs and talking about, normalizing it within the everyday conversation. So I think that there's lots of they did have a list, and if I can't see it online, I can send it to Tiernan. He can share it with you all as well. They did have a list of really good books that they had as well, because it's about also just the normal stories. Like, you don't have to do here's the Indian family, or here's the Pakistani family. Sometimes it's just like having stories where they're the main characters, and there is a lack of that. But as part of this, the Black History project, we will be developing Northern Irish specific resources. So if there's anything that you would really, really want to see, because we're at the process of just fact finding what do we need in Northern Ireland to particularly cover, because there's so much out there that we could just do. So if there's a particular need, if there's something that you talk about, like a subjects, or do tell me, because we can make sure that that's in the resources that we produce. So it's good to know that sort of primary school age targeting is important, if that's where you see a gap. So that's something that we will be doing as part of the Black History, but that's specifically Black History. But I definitely go on Google the Welsh anti-racism curriculum, because they have so many resources. I can share some of them with Tiernan as well after this, but they're so far ahead of I think anywhere else in the UK.
That's great, thank you.
And there's also the Black and Irish website, so they have quite a lot of resources about Irish specific stories as well. Most of them are again, because of partition, obviously there's things went differently, but some of the stories that I shared are also on their website as well.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
Silence.
No, that's okay. And if not, again, Naomi said there, but feel free to get in touch. I'll send out from my email address a list of, obviously alongside the video and the contact, also any relevant information, Naomi, that you think you'd like to share with teachers that goes to all different schools. Emer's just said there, primary and stage 3 resources will be most welcome. We'll look at the Welsh resources. Many thanks. And I suppose, like all of these sessions, as I went through that, I was like thinking this is so relevant to every teacher within the school, be it primary or post-primary, but even purely in terms of looking at things from a curricular level, it would be great to have this shared with, for example, history teachers in post-primary, or with history specialists or world around us specialists in primary, who are able to drive that change within that subject specifically. So please do share this with your colleagues, because again, we'll be sending out the video link. Naomi, it was brilliant to have you, as always.
Thank you very much. And if anyone that does have any questions, like, do get in touch, or if you want to, please do bring. We want to see this embedded in the Northern Irish curriculum and in every classroom and normalised, so that we don't have a geography teacher standing up and telling the GCSE students they're 5 races of man. And so I hope, she's since retired, so hopefully that's not going to happen again. But it's really so much of this could be embedded, but it's like, how do we do it? How do we get the knowledge that we have into your classroom? And we, from the the Hidden History project and from the Muslim Graves project, we want to know how we can bring that to you. So there's no point us putting out a project and doing a exhibition and it'll go in a cupboard in a year and nobody learns from it. We want it to be a resource to you. So I appreciate any feedback, good or bad. Any questions, do please get in touch.
On the subject of feedback, before you all go, I'm going to post the evaluation form into the chat. This is for us rather than Naomi. Again, get in touch with Naomi personally if you do want to have a conversation, but really grateful if anyone could share their answer that evaluation form for us. There's a few more comments there, so we've had thank you very much. I'll also look out for the Welsh resources, but having Northern Irish resources would be most welcome. And then Stephen, thank you, Naomi. And I think that speaks for all of us, because it was a great session. There's a few more comments coming, which is why I'm kind of stalling here. And I don't want to go away in case there's questions, but there's one. Yes, primary resources would be fantastic. Potentially able to link up with uni students to develop lesson plans as part of their course as well. Definitely.
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely. Yeah. The more we can get this out there, the better. And I said, do go on the website. and learn more, you know, even just for your own self. And if you can get down to the exhibition, I'm not biased at all because I put it together, but it is really just the wealth of potential connections between ourselves, and it's a lot broader than a lot of people realize. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to finish the recording here. So again, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll be in touch soon with the next set of sessions that are coming up. And have a lovely week. And I hope the preparations for Integrated Education Month are going as well. So thank you.